when I was just coming over here on the way, I met somebody whom I knew, and we were having a small chat. And prior to that, I actually created a small piece of note just for myself, so that I would look at it sometime if I need. So I was having a coffee, and in one hand I had the coffee, in the other hand I had this small piece of note. And while I was talking to her, obviously I was engaged in that discussion. And during speaking, I just did not realize, and I realized much later when I came in for the talk, that I came back with the coffee and threw away my notes. So, incidentally, my topic is on we think like we are very rational and we are in control over things, awareness has, but it's not always so, right? That had been the kind of focus of my presentation, and I kind of fell victim to that just before I came here. And the good news is I actually ran back, and the dustbin was not so big, so I could pull it up, take that cover out and pick up my note. So you guys are safe, I got everything in my notes. So I wanted to start with this question, like how many of you feel that awareness is enough to change human behavior? Okay, just one. See, obviously, if it was enough, then we wouldn't have had these fast food companies doing business. They would have been bankrupt by now. We all know that doing exercise is good. We all know fast food is bad. But still, if we see fast food, we feel hungry. And I was talking about fast food, and this lady, Wendy, she mentioned, you know what, I'm feeling hungry. I have to get some fries. So this is how it kind of works. With awareness do help. I mean, that's true, it helps to a certain degree. But once you hit certain level of growth, after that it's a plateau effect. Then more awareness doesn't drive change. So you all know about awareness. I'm not going to talk about awareness today. I'm going to talk about how to deal with that plateau. So that's going to be the focus of the presentation. So the question is, what else do we need? So before I get into the answer, let me tell you the story of Eugene Pauly. And this picture is not of Eugene Pauly. I couldn't find this picture on the internet. So this is the picture of Dr. Larry Squire, who was dealing with this case. So Eugene had a very mysterious problem, and he faced viral encephalitis, and as a result of that, a portion of the brain got damaged. And interestingly, he would do almost every function in his life just like a normal person, just with one change, that he could not remember things beyond a few seconds. So if you meet Eugene, it would be like, he would come and say, hi, I'm Eugene. How are you doing today? So you introduce and you talk to him, and just after 1 minute, he will say, hi, I am Eugene, how are you doing today? So he could not retain any new information in his brain. So quite obviously, he had to be under extreme supervision. And he went to a new neighborhood with his wife, and his wife had to always take care of him. And every morning, his wife and Eugene, they used to go for a small walk. And in one of the mornings, what happened was, his wife was a little bit delayed, and she got ready, came into the living room to take Eugene out, and she noticed Eugene was not there. So she went around to look into the other rooms if Eugene has wandered into some other place or not. But she couldn't find him. So she got a little bit scared, went out through the streets, couldn't find him. She started knocking on neighbors' doors, couldn't find him. She was screaming in the neighborhood to find him. And after a frantic search, she finally broke down into tears, and she decided to come back home and call the police. So she just got into the room, into the living room, and she noticed Eugene sitting there and watching History Channel. And Eugene looked at his wife, and with a curiosity, like, why the hell are you crying? And his wife asked, where were you? And Eugene obviously couldn't give any answer. He said, I don't know, can't remember. So she was quite perplexed that how could Eugene, and by the way, then what she noticed was that there were some pine cones on the table. And she also noticed that his hand was filled up with some sap and dirt, and she knew the area where the pine cones could be found. So she realized that Eugene actually went out, collected these souvenirs, and came back home. So she was quite perplexed, like, how could this happen? Because he cannot remember anything, and he went to a neighborhood which he doesn't know. So she called up Dr. Squire and his team, and they were also quite perplexed. They came back and they started doing some studies, and they figured out something very interesting. So they asked Eugene, do you know where the refrigerator is? And he said, no, I have no clue. He could not even draw a rudimentary map of the house. But then whenever he felt hungry, he would automatically go to the refrigerator, open it, take the food out, and eat it. So that was something interesting, and when the scientist asked, how do you do that? He says, I don't know, I just do it. So if he doesn't know where the bathroom is, but if he gets the urge, he would go there automatically. So that was a very mysterious case which they noticed, and to answer this, we need to understand the human brain. So we have one part of our brain called the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for our conscious thinking. And this part is driven by the goals, the values, the knowledge, etc. It's slow, it's conscious and deliberate. We have another part of the brain which is called the basal ganglia, a very small part over here, which is very fast and less conscious and extremely automatic. It is something like the function calls which we make while doing a program. Once you make a function call, I mean, you have relinquished the control, right? It's something like that. There's a part of the brain where this kind of very fast, less conscious and more automatic things get stored. So what happened was a portion of the prefrontal cortex got completely damaged, but his basal ganglia was intact. So what was happening was, even though he could not remember anything, which is the conscious part of the brain, his brain was storing habits, because the habits are stored there. So he cannot remember the habits, yet he can do it. So we all have this kind of things happening to us in our day-to-day life. For how many of you face this, like you are in an elevator, engrossed in some thought, the door opens in the ground floor, and you get out. How many of you face this? Congratulations, your basal ganglia is working. Okay, so that's the reason exactly what happened. Like in my hand, I have this piece of paper, and in front of me is the dustbin, and automatic reaction, throw it in. So that's how the basal ganglia works. Interestingly, 40% of our daily actions are driven without thinking. We do things like changing gear, tying the shoelace. If you think of it, tying shoelace is actually very complex. If I ask you to describe this process, you'll find it very hard, right? But you can do it without thinking. The reason is this process is stored in the basal ganglia, and you don't need to think about it. So that's the reason why like we are not bogged down by all these small things in our day-to-day life, because the basal ganglia takes care of all these things. So similarly, we have certain other bad habits, like checking, like during those days of BlackBerry, whenever that red light blinks, even if it is while you are in the middle of your sleep, you will find a kind of urge to go reach out, and it's like one of the biggest missions in your life to check which are the new emails, right? It's very automatic. Or the same thing happens with guys, sometimes they just download and open something, and then they realize, my God, what did I do? But when they did it very automatically, right? So we do have all these good habits and bad habits which are ingrained into our basal ganglia. So the question is, how do we build a new habit? So now let me tell you a story. There was a guy called Hopkins, and Hopkins was one of the great marketing minds in early 1900s. So this guy created a lot of these campaigns of Quaker oats and Goodyear tires and stuff like that. So one day, and in fact he made so much of money that in his autobiography he actually wrote several paragraphs on how difficult his life was in terms of spending the kind of money which he earned. So I wish we all had such a difficult life. So this guy once was approached by a friend of his. He came and said, you know what, I got a very interesting thing. He created a concoction of several chemicals, etc., and created a paste for cleaning your teeth. And he gave it a name called Pepsodent. And he said, see, I got a wonderful business idea. Can you help me to market this? And at that point of time, only 7% of people in US were brushing their teeth. Only 7%. So dental hygiene was a big challenge throughout the country. So Hopkins knew that it's a very bad place to be in, so he politely declined. But this guy kept on pursuing him, and finally he gave in. And what Hopkins at that point of time derived was a kind of science behind the marketing strategies or advertisement. So he created a kind of scheme which was to build a habit in the buying process or the adoption process. So the way he sold things was, he told, in order to have energy throughout the day, you should have Quaker oats, but just having Quaker oats is not enough. You have to have one bowl of Quaker oats every morning. So that was his trick, one bowl every morning. So he was kind of trying to inculcate a habit. So that was his scheme of running these campaigns. So he did a lot of search on in the medical literature to figure out like how he would create this habit of brushing teeth. So he noticed something interesting that if you feel your teeth with the tongue, you can sometimes feel a film on top of the teeth. So he found out that this could be an interesting trigger to sell the toothpaste. So he says that in his advertisements, which I couldn't show here because I was worried like what are the rights, etc., but you can go and figure that those ads out. So if you feel the film, that's the culprit, that's going to make you look crazy. So you should remove that film using Pepsodent and have a great smile. Okay? So he created this mechanism that the moment you feel this film, you should brush your teeth and have a great smile. So that was his formula. And within a few years, Pepsodent not just became a very big hit, an entire industry emerged for brushing teeth. And by the way, toothpaste has nothing to do with removing that film. You can just eat one apple, you can drink some water. Brushing is important, but not toothpaste. Okay? But he created this entire industry out of this campaign. So one thing which he did not realize at that point of time, so this is the kind of high-level algorithm for building a habit. You should have a trigger, you should have a routine, and you should have a reward. Here the reward is like you have a great smile or great dental hygiene. But one thing which he did not realize, which was realized much later in around 1990s, through some experiments at MIT on craving. So I'm not going to get deep into craving, but there is an interesting thing which took this habit and made it a lasting or a sticky habit. And how does craving work? So one thing which Hopkins did not realize at that point of time was that in Pepsodent they put some stuff which created this tingling sensation inside the mouth. So it was some mint oil and a few things like that. So initially that was like an irritation. But today for us it's a feeling of freshness, right? I mean, we associate that irritation with a feeling of freshness. So what he did was that because of this, once somebody kind of did it a few number of times, people started craving for that tingling sensation because that kind of signified that your mouth is fresh. Though that tingling sensation again has nothing to do with the freshness of your mouth. So this is the thing which is the other part, like a crave or creating a crave is the second element apart from this habit cycle to make a routine, to make a habit stick. And we'll get into a few examples later on. So let's have this is the high level structure. The way you need to build a new habit is you have to find a predictable and recurring trigger. So that's very important. Like every morning or every time you do something which is very predictable, you have to connect it with that. And then you associate the routine, and then finally the other part is figuring out a reward which works for that individual. And then doing a lot of practice. This is very important, and practice without exceptions. So if you practice where like 30 to 40% of the time you are doing something, another 20% time you are doing something else, it's not going to work. 90% of the time or more you should do that same thing over and over again, and after some time it's going to become automatic. So that's the reason why there have been some experiments, like what people did was just change the gears in a bicycle in such a way that when you turn left, it rotates on the right. And amazingly, if you try a bike like that, you will not be able to ride even. And there's a guy who did experiment. It took that guy almost 9 to 10 months to unlearn and relearn this, because it's so ingrained in our mind. So doing a lot of practice without exception is the key. Now the next thing is how do we change a habit? And there's a bad news, but that goes well with the RSA conference, because here we are to sell fear, uncertainty, and doubt. That is, old habits never die, right? So what do we do? I mean, what kind of APT solution have we got? So we do have a solution. And the solution is, I'll give an example. So this is of habitual drinking. So when researchers have studied a lot of people who have this habit of drinking, interestingly, most of the people who have this habit of drinking, they don't drink for getting intoxicated. They do it for some other reason. It could be getting bored, it could be something else other than getting intoxicated. So suppose let's consider this is the example where the trigger for a habit of drinking is getting bored. So whenever the guy gets bored, comes back home, a little bit bored, takes a glass of whiskey, starts his favorite movie channel or something, and the reward is he feels some relief. So this is the usual habit. So how do we then change this habit? The way to change this habit is, and you know that habits don't die, so what you have to do is, keeping the trigger same, you have to create a new routine with this same reward. So what you are doing is, in this cycle of trigger, routine, and reward, you just change the routine and build a new habit with the same trigger. And what you can do is, like the moment you can create a new habit, that the moment you feel bored, you can talk to your girlfriend or boyfriend, or go for a game which you like, or do something interesting. And this really works. I mean, there have been a lot of experiments that you can actually make this happen if you can practice it enough. So the idea behind changing habit is, you have to first kind of figure out what is this habit cycle, what's the trigger, the routine, and the reward. And it looks simple, but it is not. It's something like the fuzzing. Fuzzing looks sometimes very simple, but finding things out is hard. So you have to figure out what's that trigger, and then with the same trigger build a new routine. That's the idea, and practice it. So until now this looks quite easy, right? I mean, if you have to build a habit, you have a trigger, a routine, and a reward, and you practice it enough, you can get a craving for something that's going to be the icing on the cake. If you have to change the habit, keep the same trigger, create a new routine. That's the simple thing. You can summarize in just 2 minutes. But a lot of easy things are super hard to do. And this is exactly the same. And like example is, understanding buffer overflow conceptually is quite easy, right? But if you have to do fuzzing and reversing and find a vulnerability, that's hard. But what is harder is writing a reliable exploit. Those who are into exploitation, you know how hard it is to write a reliable exploit, and finding out one exploit that works for everything is super, super hard. So the problem of habit is very similar. And if you look at the guys who are doing research on it, are not so much of the security guys, but the marketing guys. Like Coke built this happiness campaign for a reason. The goal is that the trigger is happiness. So in any movie, if you see pushing the ads, it will be only in the happy scenes, not in the sad ones, right? So because that's what they want. And they know that in a day, at least a couple of times you will be happy and you'll think of Coca-Cola. That's their goal. Now, the alcohol companies actually go one step further. They say whether you are happy or sad or bored, you always have a drink. And these guys are spending billions of dollars. Facebook is doing the same, just to build habits in us. And I remember once I was out with my wife to shopping mall, and we were passing by a McDonald's, and she said, like, I'm hungry, let's have some fries. And I told her, how can you be hungry? We just had lunch 1 hour back. So she looked at me and said, it's my hunger, how can you tell? I realized that it's a difficult task. I should surrender. Immediately, you should know when to surrender. I realized this is the moment to surrender. But later on, I bought a book on the science of habits and gifted it to her. So what's the hard thing about the habits? It is finding a reliable trigger and a reward. That's very, very hard. Because for every individual, it could be different. What's that reliable trigger and reward? And creating the craving, that's super hard. Like Febreze, when they tried to market this solution early on, they tried to market it as it's going to remove all odor. But the problem was that the people whose house actually stink the most, they never felt it. Okay. So the problem is invisible to the guys who are facing it. So later on, they had to add some nice fragrance to it and change their advertisement to, like, at the end of your cleaning routine, add a few drops of Febreze to feel fresh. Okay, so that was the early ads, and later on, once people got acquainted with it, they came back to the older ad. So these guys actually, P&G spent millions of dollars just to figure this out. So it is very hard. That's a single thing, it takes a lot of time. So let's come back to how we apply the science of habit in security and a little bit in our life. Let's take this example of creating a habit of locking the computer screen. So I'll explain this to you. The next few will do it together. So the goal is that one should lock the system when the guy is leaving. So in order to do this, we need a good trigger and we need a routine. Routine is obvious, it's locking the screen, and the reward. So one of the triggers which you can choose is getting up from the chair. So what you do is, every time, so this is a practice which you need to do, every time you get up from the chair, you immediately press Ctrl-Alt-Del, Enter, or whichever shortcut you have based on your system. The key is to do it exactly with this. If you stand up, wander around a little bit and come back and do it, it's not going to become a habit. It will become a habit if you stand up and immediately do it, or while standing up do this. And I have this habit, I automatically just lock this while I'm standing up. And sometimes what happens is, if I was doing something very confidential, I don't even remember that I locked or not. I actually go back to check, did I lock? Okay, that's what happened to me over there in the corner. I did not realize that I threw away this shit. So the trigger is getting up from the chair, and the reward is here a feeling of security. Now, how do you then make this happen? You can't just tell people that you should lock the screen. I mean, you can, some guys will adopt it, but those who don't, for them, you have to make them rehearse this. So what you can do is, get some guys, who are the difficult guys, who could not change this, tell them, okay, let's do this exercise together. And you make them do this 20 times. Okay. And after some time, and you ask them, like, sometimes one key thing is, like, it might happen sometimes you might forget to lock the computer, right? So you were sitting, you came up, forgot to lock. So then the suggestion is that you ask that guy, okay, you should go back, sit once more, lock it and come back. Okay. So not just during the drill session, ask them to practice it in their day-to-day life. The key thing is to make it a way of life. So this is one. The next, let's take this example of changing the habit of writing down password. So initially I I had it as changing the habit of writing down password, not in open areas. And then an old friend of mine said, writing down passwords is good. You should not have a controversial example like that. So I changed it to writing down password in open areas. And old friend means like a friend who is old with gray hairs. So how do we deal with this? Let's get some ideas from you guys. So what we have to do is, we have this habit of writing down password. There's a guy who got this habit of writing down password. We want to make that guy change the habit. How will you do that? Any ideas? Yes?
I think one of the things you have to do is, you know what the trigger is, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's acquiring a password, but I think it's important to examine potential routines that would allow easier retrieval of the password after it's written down.
Yeah. So you guys could hear him?
Yeah.
Okay. So strategically, that's right. So let's have the tactic. Let's make it tactical. So the goal is to stop writing down passwords. So trigger, as you mentioned, is every time a new password is asked. So what you do is, you can ask these guys, you want to write down passwords, this is the old routine, it's fine, you can write down the password. It's very hard to change that, right? But now, instead of writing down the password, you tell them, write down the clue. So that's easier for somebody to adopt. A guy who has built this habit over a period of time of writing down password, if we ask that guy, stop writing down password, it's like telling that guy, stop eating French fries. I mean, we can't do it ourselves. Why do I expect the guys to do that in case of security? It's an unfair ask, right? So make it easy for them. Ask them, write down the clue. Whatever that clue is. And you can actually train them in terms of how to write clues easily. Because sometimes some guys might not have the way to write clues. So basically, again, this is the strategy or the tactic, and you make that guy do this practice a lot of times. Like, you make the guys, the difficult guys, come into a room and do this drill. Give them new password requests and ask them, can you set passwords? Next, preventing phishing. So obviously, like if you tell the guy that if there is a very interesting link which tells you are going to win this big thing, do not click on that. We do that, right? Do not click on that. It's something like telling you guys, do not think of a pink elephant. I forbid you to think of French fries. So the mind actually just listens to or hears French fries or pink elephant. That's the reason why we think of pink elephant, even if I ask you not to think of that. So asking them not to do things is not a good idea. So how do we deal with preventing phishing? So the old habit is that people find interesting link, they click on it and give their information, right? That's the old habit. So how do we change this old habit and bring in a new habit? Anybody who wants to give it a shot? Yes? Okay, let's hear from you this time. Yeah.
Replace the click on the link with click on something else.
That's a nice idea. Yeah. Okay.
Forward email to security team.
Sorry?
Forward email to security team.
Okay. Okay. So that's another idea. Yes.
So I had to actually use this one in my own home.
Mm-hmm.
My partner has this habit of clicking on links. And one time forwarded an email to the security team, me, and said, what do you think about this link? I said, that is a phishing scam, they're trying to get your data. Can we click on the link and find out what's there? So I said, how about this? When you find a link that you think might be suspicious, research it. Do something to find out if the link is suspicious. Replace just clicking on it with doing something related to it to find out if it's bad.
Yes.
But for that to work, the research has to be fruitful. And there's all sorts of phishing schemes that will generate pages on the web that say a lot of legitimate pages are indeed scams.
True. Very
So
true.
let's all your ideas are very good. I mean, some will work for a few, some will work for more number of guys. Let me do one thing. Let me share this, which is kind of aligned. And before that, one interesting thing is, earlier I had founded a security company, and my background is more of computer science and algorithms. My co-founder was a hacker, so he always thinks, and he's very paranoid. So I remember when I used to have these discussions on business planning with him. The moment I tell him one idea, immediately he finds out a flaw. And imagine, can you have a business plan which is 100% foolproof? There's always a worst case scenario, right? And if I had this, and this was very, very disturbing for me early on, that he always would find out a flaw. That's how his mind worked. He was always suspicious. And I think that's the kind of solution. So what you could do is, old habit is, this is very important. The trigger is, people feel that a legitimate entity is asking for personal details. Because if that guy thought that it is a bad guy asking for details, that guy will not share, right? So the trigger is not that somebody is asking for your personal information. The trigger is somebody legitimate is asking for the personal information. Okay, because that's what goes on inside the mind of this guy. So the routine is share the details. Now what you do is, new desired habit could be, trigger is legitimate entity asking for personal details. New routine is validate the legitimacy of the entity. How do you validate? The CEO asks for certain things which are very confidential. You call up and ask, like, I just received this request. I mean, did you actually ask for this? And you know one of the big hacks happened just sometimes because of this, right? Or it would be in the way you mentioned, that you see that somebody is doing this promotion, just check out the legitimacy of this guy. Either you do it by yourself or know it from somewhere else, but validate that. So that would be the new desired habit. And this is a little bit easier to adopt than telling them, you know what, do not give personal details. Because that guy has to give details, right? And practice this. Okay, this is another example of creating secure coding behavior. Now, we all have been trying to train the world in terms of doing coding in a secure manner, and it's pretty hard to make people do that. So I'll just quickly explain this example. So the trigger is like you are typing a function. The old routine is typing the insecure function, and you can have a new routine which is use some intervention method to prompt the secure function. And right now there are products which are doing this, and there are products from Cigital, from HP, from Checkmarks, multiple companies. What they're trying to do is, when the coder is typing the code, it's like a real-time fast, real-time static analysis kind of thing. The user immediately gets to know this is the wrong function. And then over a period of time with practice, they adopt the new behavior. So this could be one way to change behavior, not just through training, because training only can take you to certain distance. So I'll discuss a few examples of habits in day-to-day life. So this is one of my personal examples, because I believe you can actually use it for your personal life. I like playing squash, and I know probably not too many of you guys play squash. It's not so popular in the US, right? I like playing squash, and I wanted to play squash every day, but somehow it was not happening. So I realized I have to make it a habit. And how do I do that? I realized I have to choose a trigger which is reliable, which happens every day at a specific time. And what I realized was that every day when I come back home, I have to keep down my laptop bag. I take my laptop bag with me. So what I did was I chose keeping down the laptop bag as the trigger, and the routine as immediately go to the room, change to my sports clothes. And after I change to my sports clothes, it's very hard for me to then decide to go and start a movie, right? So then the rest part of it is automated. So I started doing this, and after a while, it just became automated. I started just doing this without thinking. So this is one example. I'll give you another personal example which was very hard for me to figure it out. It took me like several years. So as an entrepreneur, you know that it's, or not just entrepreneur, as somebody at the leadership level, sometimes things are very lonely. You all know that, you have faced that. So for me, I went through a period where went through difficult times at the office, had to always smile, but come back home with a pressure cooker situation. So at the office, I was a very, very pleasant person, but at home, I could get angry very quickly. And I was trying to realize that what's the trigger for my outburst. So I thought the trigger is somebody doing something like this behavior. If I see this behavior, this is the trigger. If I see this is the trigger. But then, those are the things on which I have no control, right? Those are going to happen. Much later, so I tried to kind of change that, it did not work out. Much later, I realized that the trigger for my bigger anger outburst was something else, which was rumination. You guys know about rumination? So what happens is sometimes you think of something in your mind and keep on thinking about it, which would be the negative cycle. So I realized that before my outburst, I ruminate. I get into a negative cycle and I imagine those things in my brain, in my mind, and I play it like a video in my mind. So before getting angry, whatever I do after I get angry, I was actually playing it in my head as a video before doing it. It took me several years to realize, and then I realized, okay, this is the trigger. So if this is the trigger, what will be my new routine, right? How do I then tackle it? So one thing which I realized was just being aware that I am ruminating and observing that could be one way. And there's a great thing about mindfulness. I don't know if you guys have studied about some of you guys know about mindfulness. Okay, that's great. So mindfulness, the idea is about observing. So, and then I realized that can I just observe it and realize that I'm ruminating. And by what earlier routine was that ruminate and react. Okay, it was like something happens, either react to it or suppress it. So the new routine is, when this rumination happens, observe it. Don't react, don't suppress, just observe. And this thing actually helped me to a certain degree. I mean, I'm still early on in this game. I'll let you know how well it goes. But this is a more complex thing when it comes to the science of habits. It took me like several years to just figure it out. And there are many other examples which I have used in the organization. Like one thing which I realized is a lot of people who are so-called indisciplined are actually not indisciplined. They are very disciplined, but they are disciplined in indiscipline. So if you want to make them disciplined in the way you think, you have to adopt a different way. So you can use this in lots of places beyond just security. So these are a couple of examples. So quickly, driving organizational change. I think I have like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, okay. So this is something which I'll go through very quickly. So augment awareness with habit strategy. It's very simple, we discussed a lot. Utilizing keystone habit. Keystone habit is a single habit which drives change in multiple other things. Like for example, I'll give you 2 examples of keystone habit. One is always being on time. If you can always be on time, not just at office, with your everywhere, then you will see you are now super organized, you are doing super planning. So it kind of creates a cascading effect throughout your other aspects of life. And things like that. So doing exercise is another keystone habit. So can you utilize a keystone habit in your organization? Pick up one which changes the security culture in the organization. It's not the severity of a negative incident which matters, but it's the certainty that matters. So whenever you are creating a program where you have some negative incentive, it's not the severity but the certainty that matters. Group sharing between people, that has got a positive impact. Sometimes you can reduce friction or create friction to either make a habit stick or change a habit. You can sometimes leverage a disaster. The disaster is the time when people are open to changes. So if there's a disaster, that's the best moment for you to bring in a cultural change. And the last thing is starting with a why. So sometimes just telling them you should do this doesn't help. If you can explain them why you need to do this first, and then tell what to do. So it's not very easy, it's very hard. There's a guy who wrote a book on just one thing, which is start with a why. Okay, so I'm not getting deep into it. There's some things to think about. So current state of research, in the field of psychology, marketing, and sports, These are three areas where tremendous amount of research has happened for habits, but I haven't been able to find out anything in IT security. So if any of you are doing some research, etc., let me know. I'll be very curious to see what's happening. Maybe we can do some joint research. Here are some of the references. I'm not going to talk about it. You can just check it out later. So applying what you learn. So I'll keep it very easy. Next week, maybe you can choose one habit on which you want to work on. See how it goes, experiment with the group. Then later on, figure out which are some of the habits which you want to change in 3 months and use war games and real practice to make those changes happen. So I'll keep this short. I mean, you guys know how to make it into a program once we start using it. So last few things, awareness doesn't work beyond a point. We should invest in forming lasting habits. This is very important. Practice does not make perfect. A lot of things which we hear looks like the ultimate truth are not. It's only the perfect practice that makes you perfect. And there's a lot of guys I have seen, like, they do the wrong practice and say, I'm practicing. But if you practice the wrong thing, you'll become more and more imperfect. So this is super important. And if any of you want to engineer any habit, whether in case of security or personal life, you can do that at the bar. You can.
You so have it.
But by the way, if the habit which you want to change is that of your spouse, then it's going to be more costly. So any questions?
I have 2 questions. Actually, the first one's kind of my observation. Your statement was old habits never die. I would propose that old triggers never die, because old habits can die because they're gone if you can replace the routine in the middle. The habit is gone, the trigger isn't.
Okay. Let me answer this and then you can ask the second question. So what the studies say is that the old routine and that habit still stays inside the brain. It just becomes less dominant. So you can create a new habit. So as a result of which, what happens is that if you do not drive for say 5 or 6 years and you go back to driving again, at that point of time it will not be as hard as it was for you to learn driving as the first case. So what happens is it becomes less dominant in your mind. It's not that it dies completely. That's what the science says. And you'll observe it in your day-to-day life from like the example of swimming, people don't forget, or driving, etc., cycling. And this
I'm not sure if I would call those habits. I wouldn't call swimming a habit. It's a learned, it is a kind of a habitual thing. It's an autonomic kind of process that we go through, but there isn't necessarily a trigger to swimming.
Okay, so let's
Well,
take
maybe
it
not.
offline.
Okay.
Let's take it offline. So the idea is that the swimming as an exercise is a summation of a lot of habits.
Right.
Okay, so like for example, when suppose in driving, the changing of the gear is a habit. But then for learning to drive, you need to pick up a lot of habits. This is a summation of a lot of habits. Let's take it offline. And
So my question would be, if you change the routine after the trigger, does it always have to lead to the same reward?
okay, that's what the literature says, that you should ideally retain the same reward. That's what the literature says. Now, can you do it otherwise? What I know says that this is the best way. But my gut feeling is that maybe there's possibility because you can create a dominant new habit with a different reward.
Thank you.
So you talked a lot, most of your examples use kind of positive reinforcement to create habits. What about, and what does the literature say about using negative reinforcement, and particularly shaming? Seems to be a common thing to do in security.
Problematic.
So the literature says that positive reinforcements work better than negative ones. It's not that negatives don't work, but the positives work way better. So it's a good idea to use positive. Now, in real life, I'm a believer that it should be mostly positive, but you also have to have some negatives. I mean, You just can't have this utopian idea of all positives.
Hi, I have a large head, which it's suitable for use as a battering ram or demolishing small buildings, but which I realize is comprised to a large degree of basal ganglia. So there are a huge amount of habits that I've built over the years. And for 3 decades, I've used software. And to this day, I still expect an item on a menu bar to appear the same place it was before. I forget what that was called, I forget the word, I forget what menu it was. But I used to drop it down and it was here, and I still don't know. And for 10 years, we've had, in a word processor, different changes in design, and it makes it harder for me to use. IT security professionals have the hardest time getting people into good work habits because their software keeps changing, the design changes. And we've kind of instilled this idea that if you change your software often, you feel that nice, tingly, fresh feeling in your mouth, and your smile is bright and light, and you wonder where the yellow went. Should we start to change that? Should we trigger a process where software designers begin to stop changing things with the idea of instilling good habits that lead to less potential loss and risk, and less potential privacy risk, and less risk to the organization?
So I think you had an observation along with the question, and I would largely agree with you. We need to get into that direction. Anybody else?
You mentioned feeling secure is reward. I'm sorry, feeling secure is a reward. How can we make that a more tangible thing? In your experience, what works? Is it little mints, chocolates, coupons? What makes us feel more secure?
So you guys heard his question. So his question was like,
Drink coupons
feeling
at happy
secure
hour.
is a kind of intangible reward. Can we make it more tangible? So I actually had this question in my mind. I couldn't find an answer to this. Okay. I don't think something like that of absolute is going to work, though I have seen a few companies trying to do this. Like, for example, Facebook uses it through likes, right? That's their reward. And a lot of people, young guys, I have seen the discussion like, you know what, I got 100 likes today. And the other guy says, man, I just got 20. My life is cruel. So it is possible to do. I just don't know how to do it in security. Maybe we can just utilize this inherent reward which we have. In every human being, there are some basic things which we want. And one of those basic things, as per like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, is security, right? So we just want it as a basic need. So maybe we can just utilize that. And in future, if we can create something beyond, maybe somebody can. Right now, I don't know. My suggestion is let's just use this basic need which is already there. Yes?
So perhaps a piece of feedback to your question just now. Dr. Layden had a session earlier yesterday where they actually used a point system in security, and those points could in turn be exchanged for t-shirts and cameras and things like that, right? So I suppose you could make it a currency system. It's easy to award points for actions and then rely on the users to exchange those at a later time.
Yeah. So some incentives work, but incentives is another very, very hard problem. And I'll give you an example of how hard incentive is. There have been some experiments in terms of how to increase the number of people donating blood. And what they did was they did a test where they incentivized blood donation. Like if you donate blood, you get this incentive. And as a result of that, what happened was the number of people donating blood went down. Okay. So incentives don't always work in a very apparent way the way we think. So just incentive as a science is a very big field. So it is possible. Sometimes these intangible things might work better, but it's not necessary that a tangible thing is always going to work better. So somebody has to experiment a lot with rewards just to figure this out. Great. So thanks a lot. Thanks for